More than 3,000 years ago, the ancient world was reaching its peak. Across the Mediterranean, powerful kingdoms controlled vast territories. Great cities flourished. Ships crossed dangerous seas carrying copper, tin, gold, and precious goods between civilizations that had existed for centuries. Then, almost overnight, that world began to disappear. Mighty kingdoms collapsed. Royal palaces were abandoned. Entire cities were destroyed and never rebuilt. The Hittites vanished. The great Mycenaean palace civilization fell into darkness. And across the eastern Mediterranean, a mysterious force appeared from the sea. Ancient Egyptian records called them the Sea Peoples. They were blamed for destroying some of the greatest civilizations of the Bronze Age. But who were they? Invaders seeking conquest? Refugees escaping a world in crisis? Or were they only one part of a much greater catastrophe? More than 3,000 years later, historians are still searching for the truth. This is the story of the Sea Peoples, one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. You are watching Stylus and Sword, where we uncover lost civilizations, forgotten empires, and the mysteries hidden within the pages of history. To understand how the Bronze Age ended, we first need to understand the world that existed before it. Around 1200 BC, the Mediterranean was home to one of the most connected civilizations the world had ever seen. This was the Late Bronze Age, an era of powerful kingdoms, wealthy cities, and international trade. In Egypt, the pharaohs ruled one of humanity's oldest civilizations. Along the Nile, enormous temples were built, armies were maintained, and a powerful kingdom controlled one of the richest regions of the ancient world. To the north, the Hittite Empire dominated Anatolia. Their kings controlled important trade routes and competed with Egypt for influence across the Near East. Across the Aegean Sea, the Mycenaean Greeks built impressive palace centers filled with wealth, weapons, and records, written on clay tablets. And between these great powers were thriving coastal cities, like Ugarit, where merchants exchanged goods from across the Mediterranean. But this prosperous world depended on something fragile: connection. Bronze required copper and tin from different regions. Ships had to travel safely. Kingdoms depended on trade, diplomacy, and cooperation. The Bronze Age world was powerful, but it was also vulnerable, and soon that entire system would begin to collapse. Around the year 1200 BC, the first signs of disaster began appearing across the Mediterranean. At first, it was not a single dramatic event. It was a series of warnings. Trade routes began to weaken. Messages between kingdoms became more desperate. Cities that had survived for centuries suddenly found themselves under threat. One of the most powerful examples comes from the ancient city of Ugarit, located on the coast of modern-day Syria. Ugarit was a wealthy trading center connected to Egypt, Cyprus, and the great kingdoms of the Near East. But near the end of the Bronze Age, its king sent urgent messages asking for military assistance. An enemy force had arrived. The city's army was away. Its allies were unable to help. Soon after, Ugarit was destroyed. The city was never rebuilt. Similar destruction appeared across the eastern Mediterranean. Powerful kingdoms weakened, palace centers fell, and the international system that had connected the Bronze Age world began breaking apart. Then came one of the most important clues in history. On the walls of the temple of Pharaoh Ramesses III in Egypt, ancient artists recorded a massive battle against mysterious enemies arriving by land and sea. The inscriptions describe groups with names such as the Peliset, Sherdon, Shekelesh, Denayan, and Cheka. Together, modern historians call them the Sea Peoples. Egypt claimed they had already destroyed many lands before reaching its borders. But a question remained unanswered. Were the Sea Peoples the cause of the collapse, or were they a symptom of a world already falling apart? For centuries, historians searched for one simple answer. Who destroyed the Bronze Age? Was it the Sea Peoples? For a long time, many believed they were responsible for bringing down the great civilizations of the Mediterranean. But modern archaeology has revealed a much more complicated story. The Bronze Age world was like a giant network. Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece, Cyprus, and the cities of the eastern Mediterranean were connected through trade. They depended on each other for essential resources. Copper came from places like Cyprus. Tin, needed to create bronze, came from distant regions. Ships carried materials, merchants exchanged goods, and kingdoms maintained relationships through diplomacy. But this powerful system had a weakness. It depended on everything working together. Around 1200 BC, that system began to break. Evidence suggests that several crises happened at the same time. Climate changes may have brought periods of drought, reducing harvests and creating food shortages. Trade networks began to collapse, making it harder for kingdoms to obtain the resources they needed. Some cities show signs of destruction, possibly caused by warfare, earthquakes, or internal conflicts. And as kingdoms became weaker, populations began moving in search of safety and survival. This is where the Sea Peoples entered the story. They may have attacked weakened civilization, but they may also have been people escaping the same crisis that was destroying those civilizations. The collapse of the Bronze Age was not caused by one enemy or one battle. It was a chain reaction. A fragile world faced multiple pressures at the same time, and eventually it broke. Within a few generations, some of the greatest powers of the ancient world disappeared. The question now became, if the Sea Peoples were not the only cause, who were they really? The name Sea Peoples creates an image of a single powerful army crossing the Mediterranean to destroy ancient kingdoms. But history rarely works that simply. The Sea Peoples were not one clearly identified nation. The name itself comes from Egyptian records that describe several different groups arriving during a period of chaos. Among them were the Peliset, Sherdon, Shekelesh, Denayan, and Cheka. But the greatest mystery remains. Where did these people come from? One theory connects many of these groups to the Aegean world, the islands and coastal regions around modern Greece and western Turkey. Archaeologists have discovered similarities between some weapons, pottery styles, and artistic representations of the Sea Peoples and cultures from this region. Some historians believe the Peliset may later have become the people known as the Philistines, who settled along the southern coast of Canaan. But this does not solve the entire mystery. The Sea Peoples were probably not a single population moving together from one homeland. Instead, they may have been a mixture of different communities brought together by the same crisis. Some may have been warriors searching for new lands. Some may have been mercenaries looking for employment. And some may have been ordinary families forced to leave their homes because of famine, conflict, or the collapse of the world they knew. This possibility changes how we see them. The Egyptian carvings at Medinet Habu show something unusual. Alongside armed fighters, they depict carts carrying women and children. This suggests that at least some of these groups were not only invading armies, they were migrating communities. Perhaps the sea peoples were not simply destroyers arriving from the outside. Perhaps they were people caught in the same storm that was already tearing the Bronze Age world apart. They were both a threat to ancient kingdoms and a reflection of a world in crisis. But after more than 3,000 years, one final question remains. What does the evidence actually prove? For thousands of years, the Sea Peoples existed only as a mystery written on ancient walls. But modern archaeology has slowly uncovered a more complex picture. Across the Mediterranean, excavations reveal a world experiencing enormous change around 1200 BC. At Ugarit, archaeologists found evidence of destruction and abandonment. Across the Aegean, the great Mycenaean palace centres that once controlled wealth and administration collapsed. But the evidence does not show one enemy defeating everyone. Instead, it reveals something far more surprising. The Bronze Age world was already under extreme pressure before the Sea Peoples appeared. Climate evidence suggests that periods of drought may have affected agriculture and food supplies. Economic problems weakened trade networks that kingdoms depended on. Political instability and conflicts within societies made powerful states more vulnerable. Even modern scientific studies, including research into ancient populations, have shown that people across the eastern Mediterranean were constantly moving and mixing. But they have not revealed a single homeland or one origin for all the groups, known as the Sea Peoples. The evidence points to a different conclusion. The Sea Peoples were probably not the people who ended the Bronze Age. They were part of the collapse itself. They entered a world where kingdoms were already struggling, and their arrival accelerated a transformation that had already begun. The fall of the Bronze Age was not the result of one battle. It was a chain of events involving environmental change, economic failure, warfare, migration, and human survival. A great civilization can appear powerful for centuries, but if the systems supporting it begin to fail, even the greatest empires can disappear. More than 3,000 years ago, one of the most connected worlds in human history came to an end. The great palaces fell silent, the trade routes disappeared, and civilizations that had shaped the ancient Mediterranean were transformed forever. For centuries, the Sea Peoples were remembered as mysterious invaders who brought destruction from the sea. But the evidence tells a deeper story. They were not simply the enemies who ended an age. They were people living through an extraordinary moment of change, a time when climate, conflict, economic struggles, and migration combined to reshape the ancient world. Their story reminds us of something important. Civilizations do not disappear overnight. They fall when the systems that support them become fragile. And sometimes the greatest mysteries of history are not about finding one person to blame, but understanding the complex forces that change the world. Thank you for watching Stylus and Sword. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries of the ancient world, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover lost civilizations, forgotten empires, and the stories hidden beneath the sands of time. Until our next journey through history. Keep searching, keep discovering,